What I want to talk about today is really building off the talk that I did last week, which we called Getting to Product Market Fit Part 1, which was also called So I've Got a Great Idea, Now What? We kind of talked about business models and how you can go out into the marketplace and test your concepts and use that to refine and develop a scalable and repeatable business model. Today, it's more about how do you actually do that second part? How do you actually get out of the building and go talk to customers or talk to humans, which is a phrase I'll come back to saying. So the other name for this one is I would call Success Starts with Understanding Your Customers. And that's really what this is all about. It's about getting out of out of the classroom, out of your dorm, out of your apartment, out of your office space, and actually engaging with the marketplace to develop empathy and understanding for them. Okay? So, and a lot of the way that this is done is actually going to be a little counterintuitive, or at least counter to your instincts. And so what I want to do is share with you some tips and tricks and secrets on how to best do this process of customer discovery. Okay. By the way, I'm Frank Rimalovski. I'm the executive director of the Entrepreneurial Institute. I do a little bit of teaching, but mostly what we do here is work directly with entrepreneurs to help them take their ideas or inventions and turn them into startups. So for those of you who don't know, in addition to Startup School, we run a whole array of programs and resources, from personalized coaching to accelerators. We have grant programs. Come on, we have plenty of seats right over here. And a whole host of other stuff that I won't bore you with. A lot of it's detailed on our website, which I encourage you to check out. So, and the real reason why you want to, going back to develop that empathy, I think is actually summarized really well by Joe Gebbia, who's one of the founders of Airbnb. He says you want to go out and talk to people that you're designing for, such that you can understand the world from their point of view in order to inform your point of view, right? Because you might have a great idea or a great product, but if that doesn't meet the needs or solve the problems or address the pain points of your customer, okay, then what's the point, right? We talked last week, for those of you who weren't here, to refresh those of you who were, that actually most startups fail. And the number one reason that they fail is that they built something that not enough or nobody wanted. And we believe that's infinitely preventable. So a really simple way to think about this is learning about how to figure it out what it is that people want before you actually invest all the time and effort to build it. So you actually build something that not that you hope, think, or believe customers want, but that you actually know. Okay, but this doesn't mean going out and just simply asking customers what they want. Okay, what customers want is actually your job as the entrepreneur or product manager. Understanding their needs, though, is something that you can do and that you can ask them. Okay, I call this quote, as I said last week, the curse of Steve Jobs. Okay, because people think that Steve just had divine intervention and invented and created products that he knew the world wanted. But actually Apple and all great entrepreneurs, and Steve in particular, do a lot of research. But it's not the kind of research you're thinking about. It's not about doing surveys or even focus groups. And it's not about reading secondary research. It's the kind of research that he also talks about in this quote, is that new ideas come from watching something, talking to people, experimenting, asking questions, and getting out of the office. Okay, and one thing actually he was kind of famous for was Steve lived in Palo Alto, where the first Apple store was, and he would actually often go into that store, kind of cloaked in a baseball hat and in a hoodie maybe, and observe what questions people were asking and the way they interacted with his products. That's simply one form of primary research, and so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So just to refresh, we talked about customer development, which is this is the process by which you go out into the marketplace and learn about the needs of your customers. Right? We talked about how startups are in search of answers to those questions. are in search of the answers to the questions of who their customers are and what it is that they value. Big companies can execute, right? Because they're executing against known knowns. Who their customers are, what they value, how much they're willing to pay, where and how and when they like to buy, what's the most efficient way to sell and market to them, and so on. But startups are figuring that all out. So customer development is the process by which we go out and search for the answers to those questions. And we start by defining our hypotheses about this, how we think customers will buy, why we think they will buy, how much we think they're willing to pay, and so on. And then test those assumptions about customers' needs and problems. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. And then you use that to develop minimally viable products, as we talked about, and then put those in front of customers to seek validation that they're actually interested in your solution or problem. But building first and then asking later is actually just like shooting first and aiming later. Okay? So most of you, I'm presuming, are in this stage right now where we're getting ready to test those assumptions about our customers' needs and problems. And remember, we also, and this is kind of the end of the refresher from last week, that your job is not to validate your product. Okay? It's not just to go out and force your product into the marketplace or even to find the best home for it. Right? It's to validate the problem that you believed you were solving in the first place. Okay? Find out who has that problem, maybe who has it most acutely, and then figure out the best way to solve it. And if you talk to successful entrepreneurs, virtually all of them made some pivots and adjustments along the way from their original idea or concept or vision, okay, as they interacted with the marketplace. And what we're trying to get you to do is what is the most efficient and cost-effective way to do that. Okay, and actually, if you're familiar with the term the lean startup, that's really what this is about. But lean is not about saving money. That's actually a happy byproduct of it. It's really about minimizing waste. And as an early stage entrepreneur, you may not even have any money, okay, but the thing you do have is time, and that's what you don't want to waste. Okay, how can you make the best use of your time and whatever resources you do have to increase your likelihood of success? Does that make sense? Okay. So last week we talked about the business model canvas, and the way that we get started working with this, okay, is by filling out our hypotheses about our business model. I'm not going to go through this dimension of, again, there's a lot of great information online, and actually the video from last week will be online shortly. But the business model canvas goes hand in hand with the customer discovery process. So this helps us identify where are the riskiest assumptions inherent in our business model. Okay, and as we talked about, the customer segment and the value proposition, which means who is your initial target customer and what is the problem that you're solving for them, the value you're creating, or why do they care, are really the bedrock for your business. Okay, if you change your customer and or value proposition, everything else in your business model changes. Okay, so step one is to fill that canvas out, but it's not just about filling it out. Okay, it's because most of your assumptions are wrong. And I'm not saying that to be flip, but we actually have data that says that over 60% of your assumptions are wrong based on past experience of working with thousands of other early stage entrepreneurs in universities and accelerators and the like. So the goal here is to figure out how to de-risk your business model the same way that you might think about de-risking your technical or product development efforts. Okay, and for years we've had processes around that. Initially it was waterfall engineering, now it's agile engineering, but this is kind of applying a similar process or methodology to take the risk out of your business model. Okay, so right, we talked about applying the scientific method to business model development, observing those phenomena in the market to formulate or inform your hypotheses, coming up with experiments to test those hypotheses, modifying those hypotheses or pivoting as we talked about, and then establishing theories, and then going and executing on that, okay? In this very early phase, those experiments are customer interviews. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about. Okay, and this is going to involve getting out of the building. And that's the number one thing I want you to remember about this talk. Okay, the answers to the questions that you have about your business are not on your whiteboard, they're not on Google, they're not in the classroom, they're not in the Leslie eLab. They're out there in the marketplace with your customers. And as we'll say, this is going to mean doing in-person, one-on-one interviews with customers, okay? And that could include everything from just simply going to Washington Square Park, identifying your target customers and interviewing them, or it could mean arranging appointments with folks if you're trying to do more of an enterprise thing. Actually, just on that point, so who is thinking about something that is more consumer-focused for their business? Okay, about half of you. And the other half are enterprise-oriented. You're trying to sell to a business or institution or organization like that. A couple of you are enterprise. Okay, maybe 2/3 consumer. Okay. The goal of this is to gain insight and empathy into your customers and your market. Okay, and what we're talking about is not seeking statistical relevance. This is not a statistics exercise. There's going to be no advanced math here. Okay, but we are seeking pattern recognition, and that's something that, as humans, we're all actually programmed to do. We know, we start to identify when we hear and see the same things over and over again. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But you need to do a lot of interviews to identify those patterns, but also to test the different elements of your canvas. Okay, so it might take 20 or 30 interviews just to kind of validate, assuming you are correct or largely correct about your assumptions, to get comfortable that you're on the right path as it relates to your customer segment and value propositions. But then there's all the other elements of the canvas. So when we actually teach this in a classroom or in our accelerator, we have teams do 100, 150, 200 interviews sometimes. And that sounds like a lot, and it is, but it's also very doable. When I teach a 5-day version of this in a class, okay, the teams do anywhere from 30 to 60 interviews in 5 days. Okay, so if you have the rest of the year to get going on your startup and thinking about spreading that out, it's not actually a lot of time, particularly if you're talking about a consumer-type business, but then you actually need to elevate the numbers. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so the first thing that you need to understand is who is it that you want to learn from? Okay? Who is your initial target customer? Okay? And we talked a little bit about this last week as well, but startups succeed by initially targeting a small market or a niche. Okay, as a startup, you don't have the resources, financial or human, or the capacity to target the mainstream market. Okay, big companies target the mainstream market. They advertise on TV and on newspaper and have online advertising campaigns, and they're targeting millions of people. Okay, you don't have the financial resources to do that, and besides, you probably are not going to build a product in its first incarnation that has that mainstream appeal. And the example we talked about last week is Facebook, right? When Facebook came out, who was their initial target customer? Harvard students, okay? 10,000 people roughly. Okay, very small market with a very simple application. If you saw the movie The Social Network, remember what they did. It doesn't bear any, or bears barely any resemblance to the product that they offer now. Okay, if they tried to build the product they offer now in a dorm room at Harvard, it never would have happened. Okay, so they had a very narrow value proposition for a very narrow customer segment. And then over time, they built and expanded the customers that they served, right, to all 4-year students and then 2-year colleges and then high school students and today, as I said, your grandmother uses it, but their product offering of what Facebook is and does has grown dramatically. Okay, when I started using Facebook, I guess it was about 8 or 9 years ago now, okay, it wasn't to find out if he or she was single, which was originally the value proposition when Facebook started at Harvard. Okay, it was more about staying in touch with long-lost friends and sharing photos, and today it's more about reading fake news and stuff like that. Okay, thank you for laughing. So who are your Harvard students? Who are those early adopters, those enthusiasts, who your problem, as it is conceived today or in the near future, has that hair-on-fire problem that you can solve for them? Okay? And so we're going to formulate a hypothesis about who that person is and then go talk to them. Okay? But don't worry or stress about picking the wrong customer set or market. Because if you go out and talk to 15 of these people and find out that they don't have that problem or they're more than satisfied with their existing solution, great. Then we pivot and we identify another market. But you haven't built anything. The only thing you've done is waste some time interviewing some people. Low cost, low effort. Okay, as opposed to building a product and then finding out, and launching it and then finding out that you're wrong. Okay? Now, it's really important, even if you're selling into an enterprise, to remember that customers are individuals. Okay, we talked about how institutions, universities, corporations, hospitals don't buy anything. It's the people inside of them that do. So you need to get as specific as you can about who those people are so that